Okay, I'm here. Kurt should be along a little later.
I thought he sent an email saying he wasn't going to be able to be here.
Oh, I stand corrected. That's the second time this morning, third time's a charm, yes. Okay, let's go around the table for roll call.
Sergeant Jason Bassetti, Emeryville PD.
Avery Robinson, Emeryville PD.
Dante Diatlevy, Emeryville PD.
Jeannie Quan, Emeryville PD.
Ken James, Emeryville PD.
Rob Schnepp, Alameda County
You're
Fire.
outnumbered.
It's always the case.
Security.
TN1 over to security.
Nora Davis, Castle. Any public comment? Let's move right into the fire report. Rob.
Okay, great. On page 1 of the spreadsheet, bottom part, we'll take a look at the monthly totals there. For March, we had 157 total responses. It's up a little bit from the prior month a year ago, but we are trending overall pretty close to normal. Had a couple of fires up at the top of the page there that were under $5,000 worth of loss, one that was over, and a couple of vehicle fires. The rest was pretty much our standard alarm soundings and medical calls that we've run. The memorandum that you may have in front of you there lays out a couple of the significant incidents. A little detail on the fire. The most significant one was an oven fire that was kind of interesting in that it had burned and smoldered for quite a while, and it actually had filled the apartment with smoke. The crews forced entry into that particular occupancy. The fire was essentially out. I think they did a little extinguishment, but they did a pretty extensive smoke removal.
In 1500 Park, they have a good fire suppression system, don't they?
Yeah, there was an alarm sounding, and I wasn't in the building, but there was some alarm sounding somewhere. It was
No, I'm
either-
thinking more about the sprinkler.
Oh, the sprinkler system. You know, I think that is true. I couldn't swear to that, but I'm pretty sure it is.
You know, these multifamily units that we have around here, what is the procedure of the fire department for checking on the fire suppression system, the sprinkler system?
Those systems are serviced and checked annually. They're usually done by a third-party outside contractor that comes in. They charge the system, basically make sure water runs through the entire system, and it drains all out of the master drain.
Does the city monitor that? Do we keep track of the fact that they do indeed have that service done annually?
Yeah, we make sure that it's done.
So who does that, George?
George.
Okay.
We also had another outside fire that was reported as an outside fire. When our guys showed up, they found that it was somebody just cooking outside out there.
That's somebody from Spain?
Yeah.
What kind of ordinances do we have about outside fires like that?
Well, it's a bit of a gray area.
In a public right of way?
If-
I assume it was a public right of way?
I don't know the details of where it was exactly, but there's not much private right of way there, so. If anybody's cooking in a controlled, like a Weber kettle,
Yeah.
it's basically an outside barbecue, we really don't have any jurisdiction over that. If somebody has dug a deep pit or some other way, or they have a bonfire in the backyard, then we have an opinion on that. I'm not familiar if if there's a strict ordinance, maybe Chief James knows about
Let's take a
outside
look at that, because we know we have a problem with the homeless and the 5150s along that stretch of San Pablo Avenue and in the undercut. So if we don't have a way to control open fires, even if they're in a Weber grill, there's some inherent problems in that,
Yeah,
as you get more density.
there is an ordinance about open fires in the city, but then we get into the controversy of whether a barbecue grill is an open fire, but yeah.
Well, on private
Yeah.
property is one thing, but can we check into that and have a
I'll ask
report
George
back
and see.
next month? Okay.
Also, we had a couple of vehicle fires. One was nothing really, and then on March 8th at about 5 a.m., the Engine 35 crew responded to a fire. I believe Emeryville Police also went, 43rd and Adeline. There was a small smoldering fire in the upholstery of the car. That was taken care of pretty quickly.
How many people did you get at your CERT outreach?
I think Nick said there was about 30.
Wow, that's positive, very positive.
Yeah, it was a pretty good crew. And you see there in the public outreach, we hosted the triannual training here at the Bridge Courtroom on March 27th, and then on March 31st, our CERT group came over to Anna Yates and did a personal emergency preparedness.
And how
class
did the
meeting.
students respond?
They loved it.
I bet they did.
Yeah, we have a program for fifth graders and eighth graders, and it's one of those things you're not quite sure how it'll go over, but it seems to be in general well accepted, and our instructor is very engaging and does a great job keeping the kids interested.
Well, that's good. I see they're ripping up your roof with the antennas. How long are those antennas gonna be down? Do you have any idea?
You know, I don't know, I've talked to Maurice at the city council meeting, and they're doing some extensive moving things around and trying to figure out maybe an alternative location, so they've been in and out a bunch lately.
Well, and we are going after them for additional costs, because they're the ones that are tromping around on the roof.
I don't think it's done your roof any favors.
Well, no doubt about that. No doubt about that. Okay, thank you.
So that's about it, and then you'd had some interest about the San Francisco fire, so if you want to talk about that later.
Oh, indeed, how are we prepared if something like that occurred with some of the constructions, say like it's going on at Powell and Holland?
Well, though there's a tipping point in the construction process where a building like that is vulnerable to the exact same fire that happened in San Francisco. And anytime there's welding or sweating copper fittings with blowtorch, that type of thing is oftentimes the cause. What makes it difficult is the fact that you can't use water to your advantage in that case, because it's a big open bonfire, basically. And once it gets ahead of steam, it gets so hot that your streams can't penetrate to get to the seat of the fire, and it basically just converts to steam well before it actually has a chance to extinguish the fire. And it's just a wide open sort of thing. So that fire happened, and luckily it was the day before the wind event happened here, which would have changed that dramatically.
You bet.
We had Santana Row 10 years ago. Just 4 or 5 years ago, we had a stick-framed apartment complex that burned in much the same way. It was just a gigantic bonfire. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot you can do when they get going in advance, because the fire protection systems may be in place, but they're not active, so they're really not friendly to you in any way, shape, or form. The 2 firefighters got killed in Boston were killed in a multi-alarm wind-driven fire. So we had a nor'easter coming in at 30-knot wind, changed the whole dynamic of the fire. So they're big, they're difficult to extinguish, they're very dependent on the environmental factors like wind, rain, that sort of thing. And it's just difficult. So what we do, and I know George has been in contact with Vic Gonzalez about better housekeeping, good work practices, that sort of thing, to hopefully address it and do some prevention on the front end.
But now, in an event, the fact that we have this signed agreement with Oakland, we'll have enough resources to at least be at the fire and try to put it out?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The county of Alameda in the state of California, we have a really excellent and robust mutual aid system, because we have big events that we have to go and work together on.
And something like that would bring in CAL FIRE and other...
Probably not CAL FIRE, but we have, every day in the county of Alameda, there's what's called a SITSTAT report, and we have all of our resources are predefined, so we know if we need to go out of county, the people are already identified, the units are already identified. We know every day at 10 o'clock how many ladder trucks, how many fire engines, how many people, how many rescue boats, it's all there.
So we can be assured that we have, if they're in that kind of an event, singular event, that we would have sufficient resources coming in.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
We had a similar event, the fire in Oakland by the BART tracks. It was a miniature version of this. And, yeah, we have a lot of resources locally that would be called to that.
Very good. Okay, Adrian.
Good morning. Okay, for this month, we had a grand total of 134 Part 1 crimes. This is a 6% decrease compared to this time last year. And we're looking at our 3-year average for the same period, we're down. And comparing year-to-date totals, 2013, 2014, we're down 26% overall. In our violent crime category, we're down, we had 13. This month, we're down 50% compared to this time last year. And we're even down 50% when you look at our 3-year average for the same period. And then year-to-date totals, we're down 36%. Robberies have, we've had a significant decrease in robberies. They're down 75% for this month compared to this time last year. Year-to-date, they're down 47%. However, we are up in our aggravated assaults. We went from 3 this time last year to 8, which is a 167% increase. Small numbers create big percentages, which we know. We're up just slightly when you look at the 3-year average for the same period. We had 7 for a 3-year average. Year-to-date, we're up 63%. Here's why we're up this month. We had 2 significant incidences for March. The first one was we responded to a call at the Chevy's restaurant. A suspicious subject was in the parking lot. It appeared that he was trying to steal a vehicle. Upon our arrival to make contact with the suspect, he fled, and in his haste to flee, he rammed 2 police vehicles, and he attempted to ram a 3rd police vehicle. So that's 3 aggravated assaults right there. That's how we categorize it. He fled the area. He did end up hitting a innocent motorist, resulting in injuries, and we did arrest the guy. We caught him.
Were any of our officers hurt?
No, no.
So that, and the aggravated assault doesn't come from hitting the vehicles, it comes from aiming the car towards the
Towards-
officers.
But the officers weren't hurt.
No, they got out of the
The
car.
officers were not physically hurt. This was a fairly traumatic experience for everybody involved with our officers. The 2 officers initially came in to the Chevy's lot, which is the auxiliary lot right behind the parking structure at 1900 Powell, which only has 1 entrance and exit. They positioned their cars, but they saw the truck that was the reported vehicle coming in, but they didn't see that it was occupied. They positioned their cars, got out of their cars, and as they started to check the area, the truck started up, pulled out, rammed our first car, backed up, rammed the second car, backed up, and went east or southbound over the line of the median strip, where he took on some bushes and part of a tree, drove out and around 2200 Powell, trying to escape, and then out the Tower Access Road to Powell Street, where he went eastbound and westbound lanes. And the 3rd officer that he tried to ram was coming westbound at that time, had to take evasive action to get into, to avoid being collided with, to get into the, and went into the Shell station. The driver then went back onto the westbound or eastbound lanes, the proper eastbound Powell lanes, at a high rate of speed. We have 1 officer that was fairly well behind him, and as he was coming up to Christie, the suspect vehicle was cresting the ramp at the overcrossing and headed down. That's how far behind we were. The officer did put on his emergency equipment to clear the intersections, but he wasn't close enough to initiate a pursuit or start calling pursuit. As he crested the Powell Street overpass, he witnessed the collision with the innocent party where it was rammed. The suspect vehicle careened off and into the construction area at Powell and Hollis there, where he was taken into custody. When I say nobody was physically harmed, our officers were all concerned because the 3rd party, innocent party, the passenger in that car, they did not at that point expect her to live. Fortunately, she's a fighter, and she's starting to a long recovery, and it appears that she'll be okay. The driver of the car had a broken arm. Couple things about this that I'm very proud of our officers for. One of them is probably in about 90% of the police departments in California, that that 18-year-old suspect would have been killed immediately when he rammed the cars. And I spoke with both of the officers at that point, and I asked them, why didn't you shoot? And they both said, I was not at that point threatened. He was trying to get away. I was nowhere near the cars. I did not feel a threat, which is the definition of
Exactly.
the use of deadly force. And I'm very proud of them for doing it, because there isn't a DA in California or in the country that would say, no, this was justified and everything was fine. But our office, getting into that area where they have made that type of decision, very few officers in a career get to do that. And it's a pretty traumatic incident. The commander was proactive, brought in some mental health counselors to talk to the shifts and everything else, and we're still having a few residuals with the officer that witnessed the collision. He's still shaken with it. When I talked to him that morning, he was in shock just about. He says, I've never seen anything that bad, never seen anything that bad. So we have no physical injuries, but we still have some aftermath on it. And the good news is the passenger in that car is going to recover. So.
And what caused this 18-year-old behavior?
We don't
Just
know.
poor judgment?
He's an
We don't
18-year-old.
know. Okay.
Yeah, he's an 18-year-old.
That's a
Wow.
start.
Play
Poor
committee-
judgment's a start.
Play committee game.
Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah, exactly.
And, yeah, no,
It's a little different in the real world.
it was a pretty traumatic incident for everybody. Fire did a great job extricating the victim.
Did you have to use the jaws of life?
Yes.
Whoa,
Oh, yeah.
bad accident.
Well, we don't know how fast he was going as he entered the intersection on, and the innocent car was coming southbound on the green as it entered the intersection and got hit. So we don't know how fast he was going, but the impact was pretty major. The officer that witnessed it says it got pushed eastbound on Powell Street for a considerable amount of distance before it craned off.
Well, good job.
And, yeah, unfortunately, we didn't realize that the suspect's arm was broken when we handcuffed him.
What are the implications of that?
No,
Okay, go
Karma,
ahead, Adrian.
karma is the
All
implication.
right.
Okay, and the other significant incident was, we had a pattern of juveniles shooting motorists as they pass by, shooting their car windows out with BB guns
What was the location?
in the
Delaya?
triangle
Oh, the
area.
triangle.
Yeah, and we did give one suspect description, well, one motorist had a description of the suspects, and Officer Patterson later saw the kids, and he stopped them and did a consent search and recovered the BB gun. We haven't had any more incidences since he recovered the BB gun.
Were the parents contacted?
Yes, excuse me, yes, and these are Oakland kids, and apparently Oakland has had some similar incidences in the neighborhood that border our city. And that's about it on aggravated assaults. Property crimes, our property crime category, we're up 4%. When you look at our comparisons to this time last year. The 3-year average, we're at 119, but year-to-date, we're down 24%. When we look at auto burglaries, there's no change compared to this time last year, but looking at our 3-year average, we're up just slightly. Year-to-date totals, we're down 13%. Residential burglaries, we're way up from 3 last year to 8 this year. We had 3 of those residential burglaries, we had a pattern in which someone was prying the door locks of apartment complexes, and the people weren't home. The others, we had different point of entries, but all of the losses are the same: electronic items like laptops, cameras, iPhones, that sort of thing.
When you say that there's robberies in the residential complex, is that the multifamily complex?
Yeah,
And which particular one was it?
we had, Bay Street had 2 incidences there where the door lock was pried, and then Archstone had one where the door lock was pried.
And they both have security, right?
Yeah, Bay Street does.
Is this a continuing pattern in Bay Street?
No, this is something that's kind of new, just cropped up. And then we also had 6200 Doyle, which is a multi-complex.
Right.
We had a break-in there, and we had a couple other break-ins throughout the city. We only had one single-family home that was broken into on Vallejo Street. And
Which block was that?
5855, I believe, was the address.
67. Oh, that was Monday, I'm sorry, that'll be next month. That'll be next month, sorry, that was on Monday.
Well, the question I have on these break-ins, the residential break-ins, not in the multifamily homes so much, but in the neighborhoods, are we thinking these are kids breaking in, are they adults? Is there any kind of groundwork here that we're looking at? The
Well,
reason I ask this question, we only have 3 juveniles detained, and, over and over on the Spagea list, you hear about these break-ins with these, or you hear the talk about the gang of kids up at the Blue House. And I'm just wondering, what are we doing about juvenile crime?
well, I can't say that every residential burglary is a juvenile crime, because over at 1121 40th Street, we had a 30-year-old male suspect walk into somebody's unit. The door was unlocked.
That's
He
a
was going in.
multifamily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but we have seen juveniles, suspects in the past that have broken into homes before.
And for for burglaries of houses, it's more of a sophisticated, older crowd. It just, guys, people that are addicted, and they can pawn the whatever very quickly, whatever they steal. The juveniles, I think, are more of the crime of opportunity, vehicles, window smashes, and stuff like that. But I think that most of our residentials are going to be the older.
When our officers encounter what an individual that seems like they should be in school during normal school, we stop them, we detain them, we find out what they're doing out on the street, and just have a general presence about the city on this. And we're not turning a blind eye to a juvenile that should be in school or
That's
appears
what I'm
to should be
looking
in
for.
school. We're stopping them, and if they should be in school, we either take them to Oakland, the schools in Oakland, or we take them back to Emory if need be, so.
And the reason why you're seeing that the juvenile numbers are low is, bottom line is our weather's been, when it does get
Yeah,
sunnier,
summertime's gonna be a different cup of tea.
when it was warmer, we were getting some juveniles in Temescal Park. We were getting calls and we would go up there and do patrol. But right now, the weather's just up and down, up and down. But our officers are keeping an eye out on that. And the other thing that we're doing is we're, between ourselves and Oakland's captain, who's in charge of this district in North Oakland, we've been trading emails as to sharing information as to patterns that are going in North Oakland's neighborhood versus ours, so.
And we're still actively pursuing diversion of juveniles from the justice system.
Yes.
Right, okay. Anything else?
That's it?
Thank you so
You're welcome.
much.
And the percentage of the juveniles with center forces shows that it's working very well.
Good,
actually.
good.
Very well.
That's good. Can we hold on the overtime report and go right down to the Oaklavia for you young ladies, because you look like you've got a heavy schedule coming up.
Thank
You
you.
want to introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. My name's Chris Huang. I'm the board president of Walk Oakland, Bike Oakland. I'll leave it at that. That's actually a volunteer board position real life. I work in First 5 Alameda County, working with children and families.
And I'm Laura McCamey. I live actually really close to where that accident happened, and I'm really glad I don't come to this meeting all the time, because I don't want to know. Scary things happen in my neighborhood. And I'm on the BPAC, and I'm also, Chris and I are both on the planning committee that's working on an open streets event that will encompass some streets in Oakland and Emeryville. There's a loop. We talked about it at the transportation committee last week, and that's why we're here. We were asked to come here and answer any questions the public safety committee might have about the event and share information.
I'm Roselle Loudon. I'm the event coordinator with Community Services.
Okay, Chief James, do you want to start off on this?
Morning, everyone.
Just a little background about the discussions at the Transportation Committee, the concerns that were expressed in the Transportation Committee.
The presentation was made to the Transportation Committee, the proposed route of the event. And what this will entail is the closure of streets to allow for the movement of pedestrians and bicycles during the event. The closure is San Pablo Avenue from 55th north to 65th. 65th Street closed from San Pablo Avenue west to the Greenway, which is the equivalent of Doyle Street. Doyle Street will be closed south to 55th, and then 55th Street will be closed between San Pablo and Doyle. The idea at this point, in the early planning at this point, is that traffic will be permitted on Powell Street, so that isn't disrupted too badly, with monitors there to aid the people that want to cross over the route. From I'd say the western third or better of the route will be in Emeryville. The closures will have an impact. The street closures we're looking at will have an impact on the tributary streets surrounding the event. Hollis, we think mainly Shellmound. 40th Street will be a primary detour route and such. And I think Sacramento and Market Street will be impacted also. Our concerns are just having enough people on duty to not so much handle what's going to occur in the event, although we do have some concerns and want to have a presence in the kids area, but more so being capable of handling the traffic problems that occur throughout the rest of the city due to the movement of traffic on those streets. Shellmound Street, between Powell Street and the 40th Street Bridge, becomes very, very congested on Saturday afternoons, and we would expect that this would provide additional congestion to it. Hollis Street, people have found is a good alternative to Shellmound, and we feel that will get some more traffic. So our concerns are being able to keep the traffic flowing as effectively as we can, and that's where our staffing levels will be more concentrated rather than on the event itself.
Well, one of the other items that was brought up at the transportation meeting is the fact that the 12th is just a week after the 4th, when all hands are on board, and whether or not, what kind of a burden that puts on the police. You know, we're a very, very tiny town. And here we've called all our policemen out, or police officers out, July 4th, and then coming back a week later, and I'd like your comments on that, Chief.
Well, this will be a little bit different than the 4th of July, because Fourth of July is a late evening event for us. We don't start to gear up on the 4th of July and have a presence with our detail until after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that generally goes till about 11:30 at night. So it's very concentrated in an area that we have control over and capable of doing it. This will be further spread out, and the fact that it starts at 11 and ends at 3 creates a timing problem for us in our shifts and such, and it's on a Saturday, so getting enough people will be the magic that the commander generally does when she staffs for these things.
Logistically, it's, because it's happening in the afternoon, are people getting off shift graveyard will not be able to work this event, and then people having to work at night will not be able to work the event. So we would have to pull from as many people as we can, because this is a first-time event. If it should go here in our city, we want to make sure that it's safe and the flow of traffic. So although at transportation, there was mention that the volunteers will be trained, we still, for the first time here in Emeryville, to make it safe here, we would have to ensure the public movement of people and in the public safety. So it will create a little bit of staffing in trying to get enough people to cover these more intersections. And
Can I ask you a question? When is that shift change? Like, is there a way we could adjust the hours that would help with that, or is there just no way in the middle of the day that it's not going to impact the shift change?
it's, if you held it, for example, our shift would get off at 6 in the morning or start at 8 o'clock at night, which isn't.
So it's not right in, okay,
Yeah.
it's not.
So it's.
So if we moved it an hour earlier, that's not really.
For like, something like that, would be, if you can relate it to maybe your sleep, like, starting something like at 3 o'clock in the morning, as opposed to 4 o'clock in the morning, they still have to sleep that. So, what really wouldn't help.
I was just thinking if there was some way, to make a small change.
That just makes it more difficult for us to staff and get enough people, because the what we call graveyard, the overnight shift, isn't going to be, we're not going to be able to bring them in early. The overnight shift, we're not going to be able to hold them over enough. So we're going to have to staff this with people that are on days off and cancel days off.
Well, when this comes back to the council, I hope you'll have the cost refined here, how much it's going to cost for the additional time in the offices, and whether or not indeed we can have the sufficient offices. Rob, how's this going to affect fire?
Well, I'm curious about the two things. One is, will there be like a typical festival where there's a bunch of open cooking and that sort of thing going on?
No, actually, this is, it's primarily a health-oriented event, and there's a basic description of what an open street event is, the purpose and what we're trying to accomplish. So no open pit, no open fires, actually.
No Weber grills, although there could be Weber grills.
People could do spontaneous picnics, and I believe that is something that we'd like people to congregate together, but to do so safely. But the only vendors that are allowed at this event are actually mobile food vendors, and we will be locating them in different corners of the route itself. So,
Do you have an idea of where in Emeryville you'd be locating vendors? That's something that would be very helpful for us to know.
When you say mobile vendors, are we talking about the food trucks?
Food
sort of
trucks,
thing? Yeah,
food
so
trucks.
like
And our idea is, one of the complaints, just so to, should I give just a little basic on open streets, just for people who aren't in transportation committee? This is, an idea is to encourage people to get out and walk and do yoga yoga, there will be free yoga classes, all sorts of free movement classes. Somebody already contacted us and wants to set up a Foursquare tournament. So just to encourage people to get out and move, and it's a good, and public health, and also to break down barriers between neighbors, and people get to know each other by circulating in the neighborhood. So that's our hope, that people will circulate and get to see new things that, oh, I didn't know that store was there, because I'm usually driving by so fast in my car, that kind of thing. So our idea with the mobile food trucks, and we haven't firmly decided on where they will go. Some will be on the Oakland side for sure, but not near any stationary food vendor. We really want to encourage our businesses in Emeryville to have a great day that day. And businesses generally do, food businesses generally do great on these days because everyone wants to eat while they're out. We were thinking perhaps near the Doyle Hollis Park, which is also the area we were thinking would be good for sort of a locus of kid activities because there's all the great structures there, and maybe sort of focus, some attention on things that are kid-focused in that area. But I think food trucks are already near that park some of the time, is that correct? So, and we would certainly, work with you on.
Well, the only, two things is if any of the streets are impacted, when we have these fairs, we have them all over the county, you usually arrange so at least a fire engine can get past somewhere to get to a building.
Right.
So there's nothing completely occluded.
Right.
And then the other challenge we have is, typically when you get a gathering of that, there's always a medical problem or two. And so I'm curious about how are your communications amongst your event organizers, and then how would you say it's here?
So let me respond to some of the logistical pieces in terms of co-location of emergency medical services, where our event coordinator is cited, and how we communicate with each other. One is every single intersection, roadway intersection, has a volunteer either helping people move through the intersections should there be an emergency situation and vehicles really need to move through. Barricades will be moved to the side and replaced as appropriate. The other piece is that we're all on radio. We have a hired traffic specialist, Shasta Pros, who Stephen Tiffin is his name. He's been working with Oakland street festivals as well as the last two Open Streets events in Oakland. He helps coordinate with all the police and fire departments and in this situation in both cities to figure out where is the best locations to site individuals and be they uniformed individuals or hired traffic staff. Last year we produced this Open Streets event around Lake Merritt, a 3.1 circumnavigational route that included 4 Oakland police officers, and this is definitely what we explained in the traffic committee last week, was that Oakland has actually really changed their attitude or their concept of what is necessary in some of these closed street festivals. When we produced our first Open Streets event in 2010, they actually required every single intersection to be to have a uniformed officer, and this time around they really put their energies towards 2 highly impacted intersections, and that was, they chose to do that, and that's probably my very specific request today is that we identify individuals who could work with Steve Tiffin in identifying these locations where we need uniformed officers cited, as well as Steve has been working in the past with Officer George Cabral, and I might be mispronouncing his name, but he's been very intimately aware of our Open Streets events and has worked with us in the last 2 events and is happy to sit down with anyone across jurisdictions.
Well, here's a common problem we run into, at least from a medical standpoint, especially summertime events. People they get hot, they need to sit down for a while, or a bunch of kids are running around, somebody twists their ankle.
Right.
So you got a 6-year-old kid who's hurt their ankle in the middle of the festival, and we don't know where it is, and then we need to bring a fire engine and an ambulance right in the middle of this thing, and it's dangerous because it's just big pieces of equipment. So if in your layout you can say people who are non-critical and ambulatory can just go to some periphery place
Correct. I mean, those would all be part of the event planning and logistics. With our event, we typically hire a private medical service, just with a small vehicle that can really move to locations really quickly. We have an idea of actually bringing the EMS team from the county because they have a very specific program. We're all on radios, and last year we had 20 radios among very targeted volunteers we call Route Rabbits, and they're all on bicycles. And then the remaining, we had about 220 volunteers on the route last year at any given time. They had a key Route Rabbit contact who is really scattered throughout the route, and the individuals, the Route Rabbits, are the ones who communicate directly with the traffic specialists as well as our medical services team. That was the primary purpose of having the radios. It's also opening the route and shutting down the route within really 20 minutes of opening time and closing time. It's actually a matter of priority for us to do things really swiftly and really quickly and simultaneously as much as we can. So the radio communication is pretty critical, and that's all part of the design that would be worked out with the event coordination as well as the traffic specialists. So those two positions are professional positions. We're not pulling volunteers for those. That's a big part of our costs. The other big part of the cost is actually the traffic control measures. So one of the things that we're very aware of is traffic's going to be slow, period. It's going to impact traffic flow in the residential area, getting to the freeways, moving through the city. But the advantage of that is that traffic moves a little bit slower than usual. It also, we have a couple of strategies. One is just advanced outreach to let people who live and work in that area, not on a Saturday in the middle of the day, but who might be impacted by traffic, to let them know where some alternative parking might be. So should they really have to enter or exit during those hours, Roselle and the rest of the team are trying to identify alternative parking areas. So should they need to enter or exit, they could have a different location to park their vehicles. The other is also early traffic diversion. So as far away from the route, so as an example, we want to start putting electronic detour or alert signs on probably San Pablo and 40th, just to let people know that there is an event that closes San Pablo 15 blocks away, to start thinking about alternate ways to divert from that particular area. Or as far north as perhaps maybe we have to get all the way up to Ashby. So it's a little bit of early traffic diversion, getting volunteers and traffic coordinators far away enough from the route to minimize sort of that crush of traffic that's backing up right onto the location of the route. So lots of logistics and all of that, but as I said, I think the main request is that we identify someone who would be willing to sit down with both Officer Cabral and Steve to figure this out.
I think at the last transportation meeting, which I was at, was one thing we had left was you were going to take a look at the route to make sure that, number one, we can close San Pablo because unlike Oakland, that's part of Caltrans, and you were going to take a look at finalizing before we were able to.
Because it was such a short turnaround time, we're still waiting for a response, an affirmative response. I believe that Jim McElvain is still checking with his Caltrans.
There's no part of it San Pablo, it's in Emeryville.
No.
No, but
It starts at 54.
the fact that it's a state highway in that area,
No, it belongs to Oakland.
it ends being a state highway at 36th Street. From 36th Street north,
Oh,
all the
they
way.
take the chunk from 54 to
No,
Ashby.
all the way north into San Pablo and stuff, as far as San Pablo Avenue goes, north of 36th Street, it's a state highway.
Oh, that, I didn't realize that. I thought What is Caltrans saying about closing?
Well, that's what they-
San Pablo?
Well, what we have heard from Oakland is that their experiences that in the past, and I know Emeryville had a different experience with this, but their experience in the past has been that if it's a temporary thing, that their police department takes the stance that Oakland has the power to do that, even if it is a Caltrans route. But I think they're gonna check and just double check.
We're double checking, and Caltrans is, the feedback that we've received today, and that's through just the history of doing the Running Festival on International Boulevard, as well as parts of streets that have the touchdown of off-ramps, freeway off-ramps and on-ramps, is that as long as there's, Caltrans would want to be involved, absolutely should a route pass through any on-ramp or off-ramp situations. And that was the most firm stance that they've taken with us. So we're double checking just to make sure that this is not one of those things where we plan for 5 months and realize that it's not even possible. But
I would think that you would have a real clear, and I wouldn't take a verbal understanding, a
Correct.
written understanding from Caltrans, that because this is the main reliever for I-80, and they're very sensitive to that, or have been in the past. But moving along from that, you talked about two professional positions that are involved in the planning and in the contact with the police and the
Correct.
fire.
Correct.
And that's information that are those people on board at the present time?
The event coordinator, not yet, but for sure the traffic specialist, we are comfortable working with Shasta Pro's Steve Tiffin, and there's just no reason to not work with him just because of his past experience and his ongoing experience with street festivals.
Our public safety people need that contact
Okay.
information. And tell me a little bit more, you at the transportation meeting, you said you had the anticipation of 15,000 people coming to this event. How are you publicizing this, and where are they coming from?
My experience is that these kinds of events are getting more, there's a little bit more momentum in these kinds of events in that when you hear about Sunday streets in San Francisco, it's very well publicized through the traditional email listservs, the Chronicle picks up on these stories, the local media really picks up on these stories. We actually last year publicized Love Our Lake Day through KQED. So we're getting quite a bit of interest from the media about these open streets events.
Do
So
you use the Express?
yes, we use the Express to do a lot of advertisements as well. We're also looking at bus shelter communication. We have a partnership also with AC Transit and BART to put electronic signs.
And this would mean that AC Transit, the major bus line, is gonna have to be rerouted.
That's correct.
And they're amenable to that, and they will work with you on that.
We've
These are the key issues.
That's correct. We have had really great partnerships with AC Transit, and that we had 5 bus lines rerouted around the lake last year. And this, as I mentioned in the transportation meeting, is that this particular route is actually kind of nice in that there are alternate routes immediately adjacent to the event route, which means that the buses really don't have to go spur off very far to connect back to San Pablo, for example. Right? I believe only 72 and 72R doesn't even.
It doesn't run on Saturdays, it would be 72 and 72M, I believe.
But
are the buses.
that's something that.
They run pretty often.
Yeah, what I'm interested in, there seems to be a number of loose ends that impact safety. And I would hope as this moves down the track and as you pull it together, that you come back and let the Public Safety Committee know, probably come back again in June and let us know how it's developing. Does that sound reasonable?
And I would also request perhaps a meeting to plan some of these logistics, to tighten up the loose ends prior to that meeting. So if there are individuals who would like to be at the table with our traffic specialist.
The commander will be your contact point.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to have George Warren, the fire marshal, up here and part of that too.
And can I just want to go back to your questions about fire and medical safety, because I'm not sure we totally addressed them. And one question I have is, you were saying that food trucks in front of buildings could be an issue. If food trucks are next to the park, is that better? Because they're not next to a building, they're next to an open space? If they
Well,
were
the challenges we typically run into are, if it's a street fair where there's a bunch of tented vendors, that they put those tents over the fire hydrants and anchor them to the fire hydrants, and you either can't get to it or you can't see it. I mean, we have them on maps, but it's still different to try and actually locate it. And they're great anchor points on windy days, so if things get tied to them, it's one good thing that it's anchored, but it's also a pain to actually physically get to it, and we just don't have the time to move a bunch of things. So being mindful of that, plus the fire department connections that go into the buildings are a great place to hang jackets and put carts in front of them. And so those, again, you know, if it takes 5 minutes to try and figure this out, that's not a good 5 minutes that we have to waste. So the pathway to get past the, whatever the vendor booths are, the food trucks, whatever, as long as you can get past them up every street to get to the buildings, and then all the internal sorts of fire protection things aren't compromised or hidden, is very helpful.
And just so you get a visual on what this is, it actually won't look like a street fair with the rows of booths and sort of the narrow, there will be some tents, like there will be a first aid tent, I'm sure, and there will be some tents like information booths, and probably some partners will have tents, but that will be very minimal. I think the route is about 3 miles, and there will not be very many. Mostly what you'll see as you go along the route will be a spot on the street where someone has laid out a dozen yoga mats and is giving a free yoga class, or someone else has a boombox and is giving a free Zumba class, you know, on one side. And this, because there will be no parked cars, there will be more space on the street to do that. Some of the activities will happen in parks. You know, there will be a kids' Foursquare tournament going on, probably people playing bocce ball on them. So it'll be things like that that are looser and easier if there's an emergency to sort of move aside, you know, as opposed to fixed things like tents.
I would say take some steps to discourage people that lean bikes against the fire hydrants, because that's a bike stand, and that happens all the time. So that's the one place where there's no other place, and you have a bike with no kickstand, so there's 15 bikes leaned against each other.
We'll probably have valet bike parking on the route as well that the Bike Coalition will provide. So if people want to park their bikes and walk around, we'll have a place that they can safely do that. So
And then
that
are
will
your event
discourage
staff identified in vests of some kind?
We will have event T-shirts on, and last year we had really bright blue shirts, and everybody seemed to have be able to find every single one of us.
Well, that's helpful for us, because, you know, like
We'll
you say,
make
you're
sure.
always looking for somebody, and
Right.
you know, next to the corn dog guy, which you're probably not gonna know, you know,
Right.
okay, well, where is that? You know,
Right.
You're looking around.
And our route rabbits actually wore rabbit ears, so we, you know, we tried to be very visible and make sure
That would be helpful.
When, in your event around the lake, what street closures were done?
We closed off Lakeshore, the length of Lakeshore, from the top of the lake where the colonnades are, all the way down to Lake Merritt Boulevard. And Lake Merritt Boulevard, which faces the Kaiser Convention Center, was, half of it was closed. By the time you got around to Harrison Avenue, part of that, the street was open for, I think it was for the movement of the food vendors to go in and out, but otherwise, most of Harrison was closed off. It's such a large park area as well, so with lots of streets going in different directions. That was completely closed. Grand Avenue, we closed half of it. We actually delineated the street, the length of Grand Avenue from the from Harrison all the way to El Embarcadero, again, back to the Colonnade. We closed off half of the street and allowed buses to travel up and down the length of Grand Avenue, and had controlled entrance and exits from Bellevue Loop, which kind of hugs the lake on the interior of Grand Avenue. So there were a few tiny streets that allowed people to enter and exit, and those were basically volunteers stood there, waited for a car, and when cars came, they manually instructed cars on when to go, where to go. They closed off, kept people from crossing the streets when there were cars. And of course, by that time, a lot of residents realized that they were gonna have a hard time getting in and out. Anyway, so they just.
That brings up my final question, and I am very much concerned about our residents who live in this area between Vallejo and Doyle, from Peabody Lane all the way down to 53rd Street. I think just notifying them a week beforehand is not adequate.
No.
This is going to be a serious impact on them. They're all hard work people, and they enjoy their Saturdays and going out and getting shopping and stuff.
Right.
When do you propose to engage? This is a very small group of people,
Right.
but they're going to be very, very heavily impacted.
Right.
So what are your plans for engaging them and hopefully getting them to volunteer too, but at least alerting them to the fact that this is proposed,
Right.
that this is moving forward. It's a big deal. It will cause inconvenience for about, 6 hours. But we should be notifying them if we think we're far enough along down the line so that they have a voice to respond or volunteer. So what can you do on that?
Our plan is actually to knock on every single door. It's actually a small enough area for our volunteers to
Exactly.
go and knock on the
And
doors.
you have a flyer that
We will.
delineates exactly what it's going to be, what the impact will be.
Absolutely, absolutely. I believe our priority step is to finalize the route and
Good.
to let the
And then you'll
folks
be
know.
engaging the residents.
Yes.
And could we get copies of that
Absolutely,
flyer?
absolutely.
Could give that to Jeannie, that'd be
And
good.
if anything, I would really love the City of Emeryville logo to be on it as well. So just, it's also just, I want to make sure that the residents, especially those who live on the Emeryville side, to realize that it's not something that Oakland wants to come in and close down your street to limit your access. I think it's
I think
definitely one of those.
that's a very important psychological.
It is. So it would be really helpful to also get an endorsement from the City of Emeryville on this particular event. So our goal is the priority is to finalize the route, make sure we have something to show folks, and we're happy to do this as soon as possible.
Sooner is better.
The sooner is better. And then we typically, a month out, will start putting posters, either on bus shelters or any location that has the ability to advertise the event that's coming up. Last year, around the lake, about a week in advance, we knocked on the doors of the neighbors around the lake and actually handed out little flyers that was specific to directions on this is the best way to get in and out of the area, the event area, during those hours. And we also had Jim McElvain's telephone number. So if you have any concerns, call Jim, kind of thing.
I did have a question, actually.
Yes.
So how many years did you do it in Oakland?
In 2010 and 2013.
So how come it's not in Oakland this year? And then, is there a contact person we have for the police department that Jeannie can contact? So on a debrief on what they saw as their problem.
Sure.
So it would be police to police.
Will do.
This is not going to be of the magnitude of the Lake Merritt event.
It just depends. I mean, it is a very accessible location, and I think that people are really drawn to this area. So
I have to say that I was riding on the Doyle Street Bikeway the other day and envisioning people, riding down, that's such a nice connector from Berkeley, just getting on their bikes and riding down that nice steep greenway and joining in. Because it is fun to be, there's a lot of small children who you can feel safe riding, kids who are kind of wobbly. There's a lot of those at every one of these events.
So what was it, how come not Oakland again?
Okay, so it is Oakland. And what happened this year is that the Golden Gate neighborhood, SPGIA, the Neighborhood Association, got together and really wanted to do an event in their neighborhood, and because, Emeryville, North Emeryville is sort of part of the Golden Gate neighborhood in a way, we go back and forth a lot.
Absolutely.
They thought it would be nice to, this was sort of a logical loop, the streets connected well, and so they approached some of us in Emeryville, and they said, would you be interested in doing this? And I know there's been some interest in Emeryville. The mayor, when she was on the BPAC for years, would always nudge me and say, let's do that. And Emeryville, when we would hear about events in other cities, but we, it wouldn't have been very fun to just close the streets and have everyone ride around Doyle Hollis Park or something. We're such a small city that to do an open streets event without causing huge disruption to the freeway or something would have been very challenging. So it's kind of nice, and plus Oakland brings a lot of experience, so it's a nice opportunity for us to be able to participate in something like this without having to carry all the weight of it, with being able to have the experience of some people who've done it before and have a lot of experience. And I think it's a great opportunity to sort of showcase some of what's great about Emeryville. Part of what's going to happen at this event is local artists and other people will be invited to come out, and there will be planned activities, but people will also spontaneously come out in the street and paint a picture for while everyone's watching or something. It's a great opportunity to sort of introduce people to parts of Emeryville they might not know. We're not just Bay Street, there's other things going on.
And Laura, you will be responsible for making sure that the residents in this area that are impacted know as soon as you get a route that they're alerted to the fact, so that they have the ability to have early input into it.
Yeah.
I've got one other.
Just one more, Rob.
Do you have an identified, like a command post where there's the person who's in charge of the event is there, who can make decisions for the entire event? Is there somebody that's identified on duty during that thing?
You mean a uniformed individual?
No,
or
it's
just
somebody from your end. This is an event of mass gathering, so 15,000 people talking.
Yep.
So
Yep.
what I would like to see would be an event map that's sort of aimed at us, where there's a contact person. This is where our command post would be, because if something bad happens and we say, we want everybody out here right now,
Correct.
then we can go there
Right.
and communicate through your radio system, or however that goes, but a command post with all that stuff identified would be super helpful
Yep.
for us.
We definitely will, and usually that is a role that our event coordinator, who is really the logistical master that has to run the show the day of the event. And yes, we typically have a primary location and then also other subsidiary locations as
You're looking for a command post.
Yeah, because and
Definitely.
these sorts of things, I want to go
That's
to
connected
one
to
person
all
that
the
can make a
events.
decision for the whole event, and in
Yes.
10 seconds, we can decide what to do.
All right, Ken.
Do you have any idea of using any of the parking lots, private parking lots that are along the route? Because I know a couple of those owners, and if you want to use them, you probably want to contact them and make them.
Yes.
Have you talked to the school district?
I did get your email about that, and we'll definitely make a connection with the school districts, because they obviously have a lot of space that is probably really helpful to use. I think that there are some also issues with using school district property during off hours too. It typically requires some administrator to be available, but we'll make that connection for sure.
And it looks like the biggest impact would be on Shannon Avenue, like Disney Group, they probably schedule appointments, so if you're going to do that, you're going to schedule appointments.
And Oakland has a different requirement than Emeryville, and I think Oakland requires the event planners to knock on every door and get people to sign off on it, so that will happen.
Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much for your
Appreciate it.
time.
And thank you for moving that item up. We appreciate
Okay.
it.
And we'll make.
Overtime.
Yes.
My favorite subject.
Well, it's 5 after 10. Isn't gonna work,
Pretty
huh?
funny, pretty funny.
Isn't gonna work. This month, we spent 56,000 in overtime. As usual, our staffing is the highest on that with $23,525. The largest component of that was our minimum staffing, and that's going to continue for a couple months, in that we've got overtime positions to staff our radio room now, because we're a body down in there. as well as our Friday day shift until we get more bodies on. This month, we spent a lot on training. We trained everybody in weaponless defense, which is a core requirement of post. It's a perishable skill. We've been kind of pushing it off, to the point where we can't push it off anymore. We had a large number in the other category, almost, well, $9,000. The major one on that was almost 6,000 or 5,600 that we spent on overtime for the collision that we talked about, the investigation of the aggravated assault and that, and what we called in and how many people we had to hold over. For example, the reporting officer, the officer that was responsible for the overall report. He started on swing shift that day at 2, and he was still here at 7 o'clock the next morning when I came in. So we spent a lot of overtime on that. So total, as I said, is 56,000. To date, we spent 448,000 of our 500, and we have $51,000 left.
So that's till July 1st?
Yeah,
Good
so
luck.
No, well, and we've already had discussions with our salary savings and stuff. What we're paying in overtime and making up more than that in our salary savings.
And as we move forward into the new 2-year budget, are we taking a look at overtime and how it's categorized?
We're taking a look at it. Sabrina has asked us to, at least when we present to council, try to pare out what we view as is discretionary overtime as opposed to overtime that is the cost of doing business. And roughly, we have about 20% of our overtime is discretionary. The rest of it is pretty much coming into cost of doing business, but we're working on that when we make that presentation to council.
Good, good.
Staffing-wise, we're still 3 officers down and 1 PST down. We are in recruitments. We held a physical agility, which was very disappointing. And the number of recruitments we had for lateral, lateral and academy grad, we only had 16 individuals come out for we only had 27 or 23 individuals that actually applied. Many of those we've seen already, and just they didn't meet our grade to begin with, and that we're seeing them again. We are doing a entry-level recruitment that has closed. We had over 600 applications for entry-level police officer.
Wow.
In the announcement, that it was made clear that the first 300 would be given preference to the testing. So we'll be testing 300 on
What
it.
is happening here? Why are you getting 600? That's unusual.
Well, a lot of the departments have restricted their hiring to lateral and, or academy grads. So just a straight entry level hasn't had a lot of opportunities in the candidate pool of young people that want to be police officers. Is still out there. They just don't have the opportunity to do it. And the only way that they can do that is to go through an academy on their own, which is quite expensive and time consuming. I mean, you're talking about almost 6 months of 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Somebody that has to work to support themselves, that's kind of very difficult for them to do. So there's a lot of people out there that want to be police officers, are probably qualified to be police officers, but just can't get into the lateral trip. And would be good, and that's what we're looking at.
And when you bring them in, they go through training.
Yeah,
They still have to go through training.
we would pay for them to go through the academy, and then the FTO.
But if we pay, we get the commitment.
Yes, we asked for a commitment, we asked for them to stay. In the past, we have asked them to sign an agreement that if they leave before a certain amount of time, that they would pay back for their academy, but those agreements have been found to be unenforceable in the courts.
Called indenture.
Yeah, the one officer we just got from Oakland is facing the same thing, because he signed one of those, and they sent him a letter saying you owe this, and he just put the letter aside and said, wait and see what happens. So, and then we have one PST opening, we're doing a recruitment for that, and we had
How
over
many did you get?
260.
60 applicants for one position.
Good.
We'll be testing that, so, you know, we're working through, and quite frankly, I don't see us getting to staffing levels in this next fiscal year at all. If we get one out of the lateral, we'll be fine, but we're getting into July. Well, I take it back. I'm looking at December as being the end of the fiscal year, not next July. We should be okay in this fiscal year. But I don't see
We're in
any.
much better shape than we
Yeah,
were
I
a
don't
year
see,
ago.
if we're doing entry level, I don't see an entry level hitting the street until almost February, March of next year. At this point, when you consider a 6-month academy grad and then a 12-week FTO.
In view of the lateness of the hour, let's hold over item D till
Okay.
next month. And any other questions for anybody? Thank you one and all.
Thank you.